Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples. We're going to get started on a final lecture in our rural sociology series. And today we're going to talk about the job market in rural areas. Now remember, to fix poverty in rural areas, we either need to change education or the job market. If not, we get that endless cycle of poverty that only gets worse with time. Well, if we decide not to fix education, then we're stuck that we got to fix the job market. But we got to talk about the fact that the job market is actually pretty bad for rural areas because of a couple of things that are already happening. Now let's start with one that may actually describe you. What do you plan on doing when you graduate from college? Are you going back home? Or are you going somewhere else, like a city? Well, if you're leaving where you grew up to go somewhere else, you may be a case of what we call brain drain. I'm an example of brain drain. Brain drain happens when we have students from the rural areas who are the best and the brightest. They go off, they get college degrees, and rather than go home to rural areas or urban areas in some poor city cases, rather than go home, they go to a place like Cincinnati or Lexington or Chicago or New York or Los Angeles or any other number of cities across the United States because there's better opportunities there for them. Many of our students at EKU coming from rural areas don't go back home. It's usually around a couple of percent on some informal polls that I've taken in my classes. That means that what happens at EKU inadvertently is we recruit the best and the brightest. We give them an education that would help create social change back home. And then they take that to cities where they already have a whole bunch of people wanting to make social change. It's frustrating because the people who could change things in rural areas, the people that could go home and be leaders, be job creators, innovators, entrepreneurs, are going to other places. That's the problem with brain drain. And really, it's the subject of the fact that we're not changing things in the job market. We're not changing educational or capital opportunities in rural areas. Because if we did, we could keep those people there. But instead, the bulk of them will leave. As a PhD, there are no jobs for me in my hometown, short of maybe being the mayor and the dog catcher. And that's actually the same job, believe it or not. So there's not really a lot of opportunity for me. I think I'd also pay $1 a year if I'm not mistaken. So understand walking into this, if we're going to change the job market, we already have a scenario where our best and our brightest are going to leave. So if we can't fix that, then we're dealing with what we have left. Now, what we have left is to deal with some really large national trends about the kind of jobs that are going to be located in rural areas. And that's something we call deindustrialization. Deindustrialization is a really big deal for Kentucky. It's the idea that over the last couple of decades, we're slowly but surely losing manufacturing jobs. Some of them are relocating to different places. In the 90s, there was this long-standing myth that all the manufacturing places were going to Mexico. Well, in reality, some of them were, but a lot of them were going to places like China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and more, where people are getting dollars per day rather than multiple dollars per hour. In the scheme of things, what ends up happening is these manufacturing companies have decided, for various reasons, that it's cheaper for them to assemble products in other countries and then sell them into the United States rather than paying people to build them here and save money on things like tariffs and transportation. The big problem here is that we lost a lot of really good unskilled jobs. Unskilled jobs are things that could be worked by anyone with a high school degree and sometimes even less than that. These are jobs in light manufacturing, coal mining, and more that due to international changes in the economy, we've lost. That also includes those coal mining jobs, which, sort of global demand patterns and things like that, and the availability of coal in other places has really hurt Eastern Kentucky. As such, we've lost an example of a really great paying job that, despite not needing any education, could feed a lot of people in your family. Those manufacturing jobs and the mining jobs were making a lot of money for these areas, even if they needed to commute a county or two over. But as deindustrialization has changed in the United States and we've moved towards a more service-oriented economy in which you perform services for people for fees, we're seeing that a lot of people are left in the cold. They're not able to get those jobs that can make $40,000 and $50,000 and $60,000 a year with all sorts of overtime and things like that. As such, it's leaving our economies in a very bad shape. Now we have places like Irvin and Estill County where people are fighting over jobs at McDonald's. One of the things that I always mark there is that if you go to a McDonald's in the city of Richmond, it's always going to have a fairly young clientele. But if you go to a McDonald's or something like that in rural areas, you'll often find that the people that are working there have been people that have been there for 10, 20, even 30 years. They've made working there into a career because there's not a lot of great paying jobs. This means that there's even more competition in the labor market for people with less education, and our rural areas, as we learned, are less educated areas in general. So now not only do we have lost the good jobs and we're losing the best and the brightest who could bring in jobs and create changes, but we're also seeing increased in competition amongst local residents for the jobs that do exist. This puts city government in a really awkward place, and it puts them in a scenario where they will often take any kind of job that they can get. Now, a common thing is to give tax write-offs and all sorts of other benefits, or even pay people to bring jobs to a particular area because it pays off to the economy in the long run. But in rural areas, it's really hard to get a manufacturing company to relocate there. But what you can do is find things that nobody else wants in their areas and get them to move there instead. These are what we call NIMBYs, not in my backyards. NIMBY stands for not in my backyards. These are things like prisons, dog food factories, landfills, military bases, oil refineries, and more that you probably wouldn't want in your backyard somewhere else. But because rural areas are so desperate for jobs, and because they don't have a lot of opportunities to bring in other jobs, this is something that they'll often use to create jobs. As such, we have things in Estill County like that radioactive waste dump, which is located coincidentally right across the street from the high school. This is a thing because people don't want landfills in Lexington. They don't want them in, well-to-do areas. So they send them to areas with lower resources. But think about the impacts of this over time. Estill County and many other counties in this area have now these landfills that they have to deal with for the rest of their days. All these pollutants, including some radioactive pollution that wasn't supposed to get in there, that now could be in the waterways, that could cause problems for generations to come, and more. And they're stuck with them. Why? Because they want jobs, but they can't find other ways to create them. So think about the paradox there. The only way that you can get jobs into these areas, if you can't change the economy and you can't change the education system, is to take jobs that nobody else really wants. And think about the negative impacts of that over time, too. Do you really want to move your new business in next to the landfill, next to that dog food factory? No. As a result, these are actually almost a barrier in some ways to other jobs coming in. But they create jobs in the short term. And in places like Lee County, we've seen that the prison system, for example, has been a really great way to create jobs. But that also means now that you have a prison that's right there in your community. There's got to be an easier way, right? Not really. If we can't address education, we can't address the economy in a meaningful way, we really get this cyclical nature of poverty. Poverty is something that in the past, it's not so much today, but it's been described as being a sort of tar pit. With this tar pit effect, it's the idea that, it goes back to cartoons like the Flintstones and like dinosaurs, things like that, where dinosaurs would see these tar pits that were sort of a mixture of oil and water that had seeped up to the surface. And animals would occasionally get caught in them. And they would see kind of like a free lunch. The dinosaur on the edge of this tar pit might say, if I can get that animal, I can eat it. But they don't understand what tar pits are, that they're sticky, and that's the reason the animal was stuck there. And so they proceed to get themselves stuck in this tar pit. And once you get your foot in it, your hands in it, things like that, you can't really get out of it. In fact, you typically die in it. Well, that's kind of the idea here with rural areas and stratification. Class mobility is totally a thing. You can totally make upward mobility a thing. But the problem is that it's a really difficult fight. In fact, that tar tends to keep people in the place. Rather than getting up from that bottom level of the stratification pyramid, it's far more likely to keep you where you are. Without education, without some kind of wealth, your chances of getting out of that social class are pretty much nil. Now, hard work can sometimes overcome that, but it's a hard fight. Having those resources would make it far easier. Thus, what we see is we're fighting these endless cycles of poverty in these areas that we have fought since we started this war against poverty in Central Appalachia and in rural areas. This fight is nowhere near over. It's something that is going to have to be reinvigorated, in fact, if we're going to create any kind of change in these areas. So what I want to do now, for many of my intro sociology classes, this is where we will actually depart. This is where we part ways and you go on onto your career of finishing your college degree, and I go off into teaching another class. But I want to, for our last slide this semester, bring back Mr. C. Wright Mills one last time. I'm hoping that out of all these lectures, out of all this stuff that I've been talking about this semester, I genuinely want you to grab onto the idea of thinking about your life as an individual. And I want you to think about the things that are influencing that life. Whether it's that information that you get from other people, the opportunities that are available to you based on where you live, the things that you've been told are normal and right for you, the way you've been socialized to behave based on your sex. These are all things that I want you to take in mind. Likewise, I want you to question some of the myths that you've been told about the idea of mobility, that hard work is the singular thing that's going to move you up out of the situation that you might currently be in. I want you to question that. I want you to ask questions of your own, because we've been socialized to not ask questions, but rather to do as we've been told to do. And I think that we're at a point that with your generation, that's got to stop. So going forward, I want you to think about the decisions that you make. Take a moment to consider them. Where are you getting the information that you are using to make that decision? Why are you making the decisions that you're making? Are they because it's what you want? Or is it because it's what someone else is telling you is the thing that you need to do? At the end of the day, I want to know that my students going forward are going to make decisions that are based on what they think is the right thing to do, not because others have told them that's what they should do. We have the right to not give consent to have that information given to us. We can think for ourselves. And that's what I want you to think about. And I think if C. Wright Mills were still here today, that's what he would say too. So let me say that it has been truly a pleasure working with you this semester. I hope you'll stay in touch with me. Remember, if you're ever interested in anything that sociology has to offer, whether that's our courses, our certificates, looking at declaring a minor, a major, or even just taking something like my research methods course, which I also teach online and in person if you like, get in touch with me. I'm always happy to answer questions that you might have. Likewise, if you're just having troubles with the college or don't know what to do with your time or your career or you need advice, I'm always happy to give you neutral advice that is not at all trying to take you in any particular direction. All I want to do is give you the information. In short, I want you to think about what C. Wright Mills said, and I want you to make your own mind up. All right, for the last time, I will see you later. Take care. Have a great rest of your semester. Make sure you finished up all of your assignments. And if you're not sure about that or you have questions, you just let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you when I see you. Take care.